So, we got an Easter treat that doesn't involve chocolate or sweets but rather another chapter in the ongoing story of Mash Bernadette with Mashle chapter 57, Mash Bernadette and You Lose Your Life. From that title you can pretty clearly guess that Caldo isn't going to be pulling many punches in this chapter with Mash. So the chapter starts off from where we left off in the previous chapter, with Mash accepting the game, and after hearing that Caldo uses his magic, without a wand or even chanting a spell to create a circle on the stone floor around Mash, it's not clear if he just cut the ground with magic as he twirled his finger or if it is him burning a circle into the ground as he is a fire specialist. Either way, Caldo explains they will be playing a variation on the regular look and you lose game. So for Mash to win the game, he has to not look in the direction Caldo is pointing for 3 seconds, without leaving the circle which is around his feet. Finn recognizes immediately that there must be catch, otherwise the game would be too heavily weighted in Mash's favor. But of course, Mash does not care about that stuff and just moves ahead without a second thought, telling Caldo with a deadpan stare that he got it. Caldo from there explains unfazed by Mash's reaction that they will do 3 rounds, and Mash has to win all of them to win. With all the rules set and ready to go, Caldo starts the game by pointing up and then we get the catch. An attack from below, once again not certain if it's a blade of energy, a beam of fire or something else, but Finn is suitable freaked out, and considering the attack was aimed right at Mash's throat, I think that's a reasonable reaction and proves that Caldo isn't against potentially seriously hurting Mash to win this little game of his. Of course, Mash is not so easy to catch. As Caldo counts down he leans backwards while keeping his head facing Caldo to prevent himself from looking up. The attack goes right par where he had been while he expresses that it was a close one despite him clearly having moved out the way rather easily. Caldo for his part does not seem discouraged, impressed or even remotely surprised, although he does compliment Mash, but it's rather hard to tell if he is being sincere given his smiling snake-like demeanor. For the second round he points both left and right and of course 2 attacks come at him from those directions. Being unable to dodge without leaving the circle, Mash instead ducks his head down and punches what appear to be 2 spinning discs, which notable cause his hand to sizzle slightly, implying that while these attacks are at least solid enough to hit, they are at the same time magically heated, probably to a significant degree given the fact they managed to catch Mash's attention. Naturally Caldo keeps his relaxed expression, commenting on how it's quaint that Mash was capable of brushing them aside with his bare hands, making it even more clear these are something you could expect a regular person to be capable of touching so casually. I do wonder how much damage they would do had Mash not decided to deflect it, given that he decided to avoid or mitigate the damage to himself. It must at least be strong enough to potentially harm him significantly, otherwise he could have just ignored them. For the final round, Caldo isn't going to let Mash win so easily as he grabs hold of the hilt of his sword which is resting at his hip and draws it out, and it actually manages to catch Mash's attention, and given the fact the sword is wrapped in black flames, which if Caldo is to be believed anything the blade comes into contact will be burned by these flames until it is utterly destroyed. A pretty simple enchantment, but if it can really burn whatever the flames come into contact with, it's not something to be trifled with. He states the sword is enchanted with the flames, so I wonder if he can only use those flames through that sword or if he could naturally summon them. On another note, it's intriguing that thus far we have seen 2 spells from 2 divine visionaries which involve some sort of darkness. I wonder if that's relevant or just an aesthetic choice. Mash makes the obvious observation that the sword and its flames are freaky, which of course they are. Finn freaks out again, although I do wonder where Lemon and Dot have gone since we only see Finn at his wits' end over this game. I'd expect at least Lemon would be a bit worried about Mash, but maybe they are both just so confident in Mash's abilities that they know he can handle anything that gets thrown at him. As Finn tries to convince Mash to stop the game, Mash admits that he wishes he could, which isn't too surprising. A pass on whatever test he is speaking of is too good a chance to give up on when Mash doesn't know what is coming for him in the rest of the exam. So the final round begins, with Caldo pointing up, left and right at the same time, and then he goes on the offensive, swinging his sword with swift deadly movements, while Mash avoids them by a hair. For a single panel as Mash is ducking down and Caldo is swinging his sword up to meet his face, the visionary's face takes on a demonic appearance, with his eyes partially open revealing white and the rest of his face cast in darkness, a hint to his true nature perhaps? Before the blade can hit him, Mash digs his feet into the concrete floor and rips the circle out of the ground as he leaps into the air while still looking down, allowing the blade to swipe in front of his face. Landing back on the ground, it seems like Caldo is ready to let up when a bird flies in and steals a cream puff from inside of Mash's robe, causing him to look to the right. Which Mash instantly recognizes and actually looks kind of downcast, but Caldo, for the first time, smiles and doesn't immediately make me think of a snake. Sheathing his blade, he tells Mash that it didn't count, so they will call it a draw. Mash is taken by surprise by this, but before you could possibly start to think maybe Caldo was on Mash's side after all, he puts on a creepy smile, before telling Mash that at his current level Margaret is going to be a challenge for him. Then without further ado he bids them farewell, while apologizing for bothering them. Mash notices something is amiss, and Finn notices it when he sees Mash staring at where Caldo just left. Mash then explains that if Caldo hadn't hesitated he would have been in trouble, but more than that, he didn't chant a single spell, or more interesting to me, didn't use a wand at all to cast his spells, which seems to be something which all mages need to use their magic to its fullest. And we see Caldo walking away, thinking to himself about how Mash was prepared to block his sword with his forehead. Coming to the conclusion that he is off the rails, which is a reasonable assessment of Mash's character. He doesn't fit in with the norms of their world, that's for certain. He does however ask a question which interests me. He questions why does he want to become a divine visionary so much that he is willing to die for it? He knows about the deal Mash has with the other visionaries, so he must know that Mash's life is on the line regardless, but does this also mean that he does not believe that anything is worth losing your life over? Quite an insightful for what could be a throwaway line. Then he comments that he would make a useful ally, so he will be waiting for him to reach his level. So he believes Mash will reach his level eventually, which to me speaks that he recognizes Mash's potential, despite his lack of magic, and it might play into his lack of a wand or chance. And I wonder what he needs allies for. Outside of Innocent Zero there doesn't seem to be a grand threat that needs facing, so what he is planning is anyone's guess. And from there we get immediately thrust back into the Colosseum, where the announcer informs us that the final exam is now beginning, one-on-one battles. To win you must knock out your opponent or get them to yield. And here is where the most surprising part of this chapter comes in for me. Mash and Margaret are the first match. I expected this to be the very last fight we saw in this tournament, probably being interrupted by an attack from Innocent Zero or something, not for it to be the very first thing we see. After Mash wins here, which we are fully expecting, who will he face then? The only person who comes to mind is Lance. Oh, that is an interesting setup. But back to this chapter, Margaret tells Mash that he knows that he has his heart set on proceeding, but it will not happen. Mash for his part remains silent. Finn in the audience thinks about how if Mash loses here then his old man will lose everything. Meanwhile Wahlberg thinks about how even in Eastern's story's history, few have talent to rival Margaret. This will be the fight which decides Mash's fate. The final page of the chapter has Margaret telling Mash that his purpose in life is to provide him with the thrill he is seeking, to which Mash tells him that is a funny joke, with a completely serious look on his face. Now that the stage is set, how this will go we will just have to wait and see, but I am expecting this fight to be as long if not longer than the fight with Carpaccio, and see Mash struggle even more than he ever has before. And maybe we'll see him pull out something we haven't seen from before, not magic but maybe some actual martial arts or an inventing way to take advantage of the battlefield to turn it to his advantage. Anyway, I have been the Anonymous Weeb. Feel free to like and subscribe to keep yourself informed about when I upload a video.